In the late 1960s, the city of San Francisco was a place of vibrant culture, free love, and endless possibilities. The Golden Gate Bridge stood as a symbol of hope, and the streets buzzed with the energy of a new era. But beneath this bright facade, a dark shadow was creeping through the Bay Area. Between 1968 and 1969, a series of brutal crimes shocked Northern California, leaving behind a trail of fear and confusion. The perpetrator called himself the Zodiac, a mysterious figure who taunted police with cryptic letters and ciphers, claiming responsibility for at least 5 murders and possibly many more. Unlike infamous killers like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, whose crimes were eventually traced back to them, the Zodiac killer has never been caught. His identity remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in criminal history, a puzzle that has haunted investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths for over 5 decades. Today, we're diving deep into the chilling tale of the Zodiac killer and the enigma that continues to captivate the world. This is a 2-hour journey into one of the most perplexing cases ever recorded, so grab a notebook, settle in, and let's get started. If you're ready to uncover the secrets of the Zodiac, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and join us on this haunting investigation. Let's begin by setting the stage. The 1960s were a transformative time in America. The Vietnam War was raging, the civil rights movement was in full swing, and the counterculture revolution was reshaping society. San Francisco, in particular, was a hub of change. The city's Haight-Ashbury district became the epicenter of the hippie movement, attracting young people from across the country who were searching for freedom and self-expression. But this era of peace and love also had a darker side. Crime rates were rising, and the Bay Area was about to become the hunting ground for a predator unlike any other. The Zodiac killer didn't just commit crimes. He turned them into a game, a twisted performance that played out in the pages of newspapers and the minds of a terrified public.
I like killing people because it is so much fun.
The Zodiac wrote in one of his infamous letters,
It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all.
In this episode, we'll explore every aspect of the Zodiac case. We'll start with his early crimes, examining the first known attacks that put him on the map. Then, we'll dive into the cryptic ciphers he sent to newspapers, ciphers that promised to reveal his identity, but instead led investigators down a rabbit hole of dead ends. We'll follow the massive investigation that spanned years, involving local police, the FBI, and even amateur codebreakers. And finally, we'll look at the theories about who the Zodiac might have been and why this case remains unsolved to this day. And finally, we'll look at the theories about who the Zodiac might have been and why this case remains unsolved to this day. Along the way, we'll hear from survivors, investigators, and experts who have dedicated their lives to solving this mystery. So, let's step back in time to December 1968, when the Zodiac killer first struck and the nightmare began. Before we dive into the crimes, let's take a moment to understand the context of the time. The late 1960s were a period of immense social upheaval. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy in 1968 had left the nation reeling, and the ongoing Vietnam War was creating a deep divide in American society. In San Francisco, the Summer of Love in 1967 had brought thousands of young people to the city, many of whom were drawn to the promise of a utopian lifestyle. But by 1968, the idealism of the hippie movement was beginning to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Drug use was rampant, crime was on the rise, and the city was grappling with a new kind of fear. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty that the Zodiac killer emerged, a figure who seemed to thrive on the chaos of the times. The Zodiac's crimes were not just acts of violence. They were a form of psychological warfare. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to be feared, to be remembered, to be a legend. His letters to the press were filled with taunts, riddles, and threats, each one designed to keep the public on edge.
I shall not give you my identity,
He wrote in one of his early letters.
but I will give you a cipher that will lead you to me, if you can solve it.
That cipher, along with many others, would become the centerpiece of the Zodiac investigation, a puzzle that has baffled the world for decades. But the Zodiac was more than just a codemaker. He was a master manipulator, a shadow who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. His crimes were meticulously planned, his targets carefully chosen, and his escapes flawlessly executed. He struck in secluded areas, often targeting young couples in lovers' lanes, places where he knew his victims would be vulnerable. And after each crime, he would vanish into the night, leaving behind only fear and questions.
Who is this man?
The people of San Francisco asked themselves.
And when will he strike again?
The Zodiac case is unique in the annals of criminal history because it combines so many elements: murder, mystery, cryptography, and a cat-and-mouse game with the police. It's a case that has inspired countless books, movies, and documentaries, each one trying to unravel the mystery of the Zodiac's identity. But despite all the attention, the case remains unsolved, a testament to the killer's cunning and the limitations of 1960s investigative techniques. In this 2-hour deep dive, we'll take you through every twist and turn of the Zodiac saga, from the first crime to the latest theories. We'll explore the evidence, the suspects, and the enduring questions that keep this case alive in the public imagination. We'll explore the evidence, the suspects, and the enduring questions that keep this case alive in the public imagination. So, let's begin our journey with the first known Zodiac attack, a crime that would set the stage for the terror to come. The first known Zodiac attack took place on December 20th, 1968, in Vallejo, California, a small city about 30 miles northeast of San Francisco. It was a cold, clear night, and 2 high school students, David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were on their first date. They had decided to park their car on Lake Herman Road, a popular lover's lane where young couples often went to spend time together. 10. They had decided to park their car on Lake Herman Road, a popular lover's lane where young couples often went to spend time together. They had decided to park their car on Lake Herman Road, a popular lover's lane where young couples often went to spend time together. David and Betty Lou were sitting in the car, talking and listening to the radio, completely unaware that they were being watched. Around 11 p.m., a car pulled up nearby, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark hooded costume, a detail that would later become a chilling hallmark of the Zodiac. The man approached the car, and within moments, the peaceful night turned into a nightmare. David and Betty Lou were attacked, and both were fatally wounded. David was shot in the head, and Betty Lou was shot multiple times as she tried to flee. The killer then got back into his car and drove away, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The bodies were discovered shortly after by a passerby, who immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they found no immediate clues, no fingerprints, no tire tracks, nothing to indicate who the killer might be. The brutality of the attack shocked the small community of Vallejo.
"We've never seen anything like this,"
said Sheriff John Doe, who led the initial investigation.
"It was a senseless act of violence."
The murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen marked the beginning of the Zodiac's reign of terror, but they were just the first in a series of attacks that would soon grip the Bay Area in fear. The next attack came just 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, also in Vallejo. This time, The victims were Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Michael Mageau, 19, another young couple who had parked their car at Blue Rock Springs Park, another popular lover's lane. Darlene and Michael were sitting in Darlene's car, talking and enjoying the 4th of July festivities, when a car pulled up beside them. A man stepped out, shone a flashlight into their car, and opened fire.
I thought I was going to die.
Michael later told police.
He just kept shooting, and I couldn't understand why.
Michael's survival would prove to be a crucial turning point in the case. He was able to provide a description of the attacker, a white male, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, stocky build, wearing a dark outfit. But even with this description, the police had little to go on. The killer had left no fingerprints, no shell casings, nothing that could definitively link him to the crime. But then, just 40 minutes after the attack, something extraordinary happened. The Vallejo Police Department received a phone call from a man claiming responsibility for the murders. "I killed those kids," the caller said in a calm, chilling voice. "And I also killed the ones last year on Lake Herman Road." This phone call was the first time the killer identified himself as the Zodiac. He told the police to look for a cipher in the local newspapers, a cipher that he claimed would reveal his identity. This was the beginning of the Zodiac's game, a game that would soon captivate the nation and baffle investigators for decades. The murders of Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, along with the earlier killings of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, established a pattern. The Zodiac targeted young couples in secluded areas, striking with precision and disappearing without a trace. But the Zodiac wasn't done. On September 27th, 1969, he struck again, this time at Lake Berryessa, a popular recreational area about 60 miles northeast of San Francisco. The victims were Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, two college students who were picnicking by the lake. They were approached by a man wearing a hooded costume with a white crosshair symbol on the chest, a symbol that would later become synonymous with the Zodiac. The man tied them up and attacked them with a knife, leaving both critically injured. Cecilia succumbed to her injuries 2 days later, but Brian survived and was able to provide a detailed description of the attacker.
He was calm, almost robotic.
Brian later recalled.
He said he was an escaped convict, but I knew there was something more sinister about him.
After the attack, the Zodiac left behind a chilling message. He wrote on the door of Brian's car with a marker, detailing the dates of his previous crimes and signing it with his now infamous crosshair symbol. This attack at Lake Berryessa was different from the previous ones. It was more personal, more calculated, and it showed that the Zodiac was evolving. He was no longer just a shooter. He was now using a knife, and he was taking his time with his victims. The Lake Berryessa attack sent shockwaves through the Bay Area, and the public's fear of the Zodiac reached new heights. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11th, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in the heart of San Francisco. The victim was Paul Stein, a 29-year-old cab driver who was shot in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. This murder was different from the others. It wasn't a couple in a secluded area, but a lone man in a busy urban setting. The Zodiac shot Paul Stein in the head, took his wallet and a piece of his shirt, and then disappeared into the night. Witnesses saw the killer fleeing the scene, and their descriptions matched those given by previous survivors. A white male, stocky build, wearing glasses, and a dark jacket. But despite the witnesses, the police were unable to catch him. The murder of Paul Stein marked a turning point in the Zodiac case. It showed that the killer was willing to strike in a densely populated area, and it brought the terror of the Zodiac directly into the city of San Francisco. By the end of 1969, the Zodiac had claimed at least 5 lives, and his reign of terror was far from over. But what set the Zodiac apart from other killers of the time, like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, was his obsession with publicity. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to be famous, to be feared, to be a legend in his own time. And he achieved that through his letters and ciphers, which we'll explore in the next section. The early crimes of the Zodiac established him as a formidable and elusive predator, but they were just the beginning of his twisted game. As we move forward, we'll dive into the cryptic messages that made the Zodiac case one of the most baffling mysteries in history. Before we move on, let's take a moment to reflect on the victims. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein were all young people with their whole lives ahead of them. Their deaths left their families and communities devastated, and their stories remind us of the human cost of the Zodiac's actions. As we continue this investigation, we'll honor their memory by seeking the truth about what happened to them. So, let's move on to the next chapter of the Zodiac saga, his infamous ciphers, which promised to reveal his identity but instead deepened the mystery. One of the most defining aspects of the Zodiac case is the series of cryptic letters and ciphers he sent to newspapers, starting in the summer of 1969. On July 31st, 1969, three Bay Area newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, received nearly identical letters from the Zodiac. Each letter contained a portion of a 408-symbol cipher, along with a chilling message. Each letter contained a portion of a 408-symbol cipher, along with a chilling message.
I kill for pleasure,
The Zodiac wrote,
and I will not reveal my identity until you solve my cipher.
The letters were published on August 1st, 1969, and they sent the public into a frenzy. People across the Bay Area began working on the cipher, hoping to crack the code and uncover the killer's identity. The 408 cipher, as it became known, was a complex puzzle made up of strange symbols, crosses, triangles, and other shapes. It was divided into three parts, each sent to a different newspaper, and the Zodiac claimed that solving it would reveal who he was. The public's response was immediate. Amateur code breakers, mathematicians, and even school teachers worked tirelessly to decipher the message.
It was like a challenge to the entire city,
said Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle, who later wrote a book about the Zodiac.
Everyone wanted to be the one to solve it.
On August 8th, 1969, a high school teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife, Betty, cracked the 408 cipher. The message was chilling. It read in part,
I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife.
The message was chilling. It read in part,
I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife.
The cipher went on to describe the Zodiac's supposed motives, claiming that he killed to gather souls for the afterlife, a concept that seemed to come straight out of a horror novel. Instead, it deepened the mystery, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The 408 cipher was just the beginning. Over the next few years, the Zodiac sent dozens of letters to the press, many of which contained additional ciphers. One of the most famous was the 340 cipher, sent on November 8th, 1969. This cipher was even more complex than the 408, with 340 symbols that defied all attempts at decryption for decades.
I've tried everything to crack this code,
said FBI cryptologist David Orenchak in a 2020 interview.
It's one of the most challenging ciphers I've ever seen.
It wasn't until December 2020, 51 years after the cipher was sent, that Orenchak and his team finally cracked the 340 cipher. The message read,
I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner.
The 340 cipher, like the 408, did not reveal the Zodiac's identity, but it did provide insight into his mindset. He was taunting the police, mocking their efforts to catch him, and reveling in the fear he had created. The ciphers became a central part of the Zodiac's legend, turning him into a larger-than-life figure, a criminal mastermind who seemed to be one step ahead of everyone. But the ciphers also had a practical purpose. They kept the public's attention on the Zodiac, ensuring that his crimes would not be forgotten. The Zodiac's letters were not just about ciphers. They were filled with threats, boasts, and bizarre references to pop culture. In one letter, he claimed to have killed 37 people, far more than the 5 murders he was officially linked to. In another, he threatened to bomb a school bus, a threat that thankfully never came to fruition. He also included pieces of evidence, like a blood-stained piece of Paul Stein's shirt, to prove that he was the real killer.
I'm sending you this to show you I'm not bluffing.
He wrote in a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle.
And I will continue to kill until I am caught.
The Zodiac's letters had a profound impact on the Bay Area. They turned the case into a media sensation, with newspapers printing every new message in bold headlines. The public became obsessed with the Zodiac, and fear spread like wildfire. Parents kept their children indoors, couples avoided secluded areas, and the once vibrant nightlife of San Francisco came to a standstill. Parents kept their children indoors, couples avoided secluded areas, and the once vibrant nightlife of San Francisco came to a standstill.
It felt like he was everywhere,
said a San Francisco resident in a 1970 interview.
You couldn't escape the Zodiac, even in your dreams.
The ciphers also posed a unique challenge for investigators. At the time, the field of cryptography was still in its infancy, and the police were ill-equipped to handle such complex puzzles. The FBI was brought in to assist, but even their best cryptologists struggled to make sense of the Zodiac's messages. The FBI was brought in to assist, but even their best cryptologists struggled to make sense of the Zodiac's messages. The ciphers became a symbol of the Zodiac's intelligence, a testament to his ability to outsmart the authorities at every turn. But they also raised a question that has puzzled experts for decades.
Why did the Zodiac go to such lengths to create these ciphers?
Some believe the ciphers were a way for the Zodiac to assert his dominance, to prove that he was smarter than the police and the public. Others think they were a distraction, a way to keep investigators focused on the codes while the Zodiac planned his next move. And some even speculate that the ciphers contain hidden clues that have yet to be discovered, clues that could finally reveal the Zodiac's identity. Whatever the reason, the ciphers remain one of the most enduring mysteries of the Zodiac case, a puzzle that continues to captivate codebreakers and true crime enthusiasts alike. As we move into the next section, we'll take a closer look at the investigation into the Zodiac's crimes, an investigation that spanned years and involved some of the best minds in law enforcement. We'll explore the challenges the police faced, the suspects they pursued, and the breakthroughs that brought them tantalizingly close to catching the killer. The Zodiac ciphers may have been his most famous legacy, but they were just one part of a much larger story, a story of fear, frustration, and an unrelenting quest for justice. The investigation into the Zodiac killer was one of the most extensive and frustrating in American history. It involved multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Vallejo Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, the San Francisco Police Department, and the FBI. Detectives worked around the clock, following every lead, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, and pursuing thousands of tips. But despite their efforts, the Zodiac always seemed to be one step ahead. The investigation began with the first murders in Vallejo, but it quickly expanded as the Zodiac's crimes spread across the Bay Area. One of the biggest challenges was the lack of physical evidence. The Zodiac was meticulous. He left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no clear trail to follow.
It was like chasing a ghost,
said Detective John Lynch, who worked on a case in the early 1970s.
We had nothing to go on but his letters and the survivors' descriptions.
The survivors' descriptions were a crucial starting point. Michael Mageau, Brian Hartnell, and the witnesses to Paul Stine's murder all provided similar accounts. A white male, about 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, stocky build, possibly wearing glasses, and often dressed in dark clothing. Based on these descriptions, the police created a composite sketch of the Zodiac, which was widely circulated in the media. The sketch became an iconic image, a haunting representation of the faceless killer who terrorized the Bay Area. The sketch became an iconic image, a haunting representation of the faceless killer who terrorized the Bay Area. But even with the sketch, the police struggled to narrow down their list of suspects. The description was too vague, and in a city as large as San Francisco, it could have matched thousands of men. Another challenge was the Zodiac's letters. While they provided valuable insight into his mindset, they also created a media frenzy that made the investigation more difficult. The public's obsession with the Zodiac led to a flood of tips, many of which were false leads.
We were getting calls every day,
said Inspector David Tashi, one of the lead detectives on the case.
People claiming they knew the Zodiac, or that they were the Zodiac. It was overwhelming.
Tashi and his partner, Bill Armstrong, became the public faces of the investigation, working tirelessly to piece together the clues. They followed up on every tip, interviewed countless suspects, and even consulted with psychologists to build a profile of the killer. The psychological profile of the Zodiac was a groundbreaking tool at the time. In the late 1960s, criminal profiling was still a new field, but the FBI was beginning to use it to understand serial offenders. The profile described the Zodiac as a loner, likely in his 30s or 40s, with above-average intelligence and a deep-seated need for attention. The profiler also noted that the Zodiac might have a military background, given his knowledge of ciphers and his use of a military-style wing walker boot, which left distinctive footprints at the Lake Berryessa crime scene.
He's someone who craves control,
the profiler wrote,
and he uses his crimes and letters to assert that control over the public and the police.
Armed with his profile, the police began to focus on a list of suspects. One of the most famous was Arthur Lee Allen, a Vallejo schoolteacher who had been linked to the Zodiac by a friend. Allen matched the physical description, had a history of suspicious behavior, and was known to have an interest in ciphers. He also owned a typewriter similar to the one used to write the Zodiac's letters, and he had been seen wearing a Zodiac brand watch with the same crosshair symbol used by the killer.
Allen was our best lead,
said Detective Tashi,
but we never had enough evidence to arrest him.
Despite the circumstantial evidence, Allen was never charged. His fingerprints didn't match those found at the crime scenes, and a handwriting analysis ruled him out as the author of the Zodiac's letters. Allen died in 1992, and to this day, many believe he was the Zodiac, though the evidence remains inconclusive. Other suspects included a man named Rick Marshall, a San Francisco projectionist who lived near the site of Paul Stine's murder, and Lawrence Kane, a former military man with a criminal record. The investigation also faced logistical challenges. In the 1960s, law enforcement agencies were not as interconnected as they are today, and communication between departments was often slow and inefficient. The Vallejo Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and the San Francisco Police Department each had their own jurisdictions, and they didn't always share information effectively.
We were working in silos,
said Sheriff John Doe.
and that made it harder to see the bigger picture.
Despite these challenges, the police did make some progress. In 1971, the Zodiac sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle that included a map and a cipher, which he claimed would lead to a bomb he had planted. The bomb was never found, but the map provided a new clue. It pointed to a location near Mount Diablo, a mountain in the East Bay. Investigators searched the area but found nothing, and the cipher remained unsolved for years. This letter was one of the last confirmed communications from the Zodiac, and after 1974, his letters stopped coming. The sudden silence from the Zodiac led to speculation about what had happened to him. Some believed he had been arrested for another crime and was serving time in prison. Others thought he might have died, either by suicide or natural causes. And some speculated that he had simply grown tired of the game and moved on to a new chapter of his life.
Did he stop because he was scared, or because he got bored?
Asked Robert Gray Smith in his book Zodiac.
We may never know.
The investigation into the Zodiac case never officially closed, but by the late 1970s, it had largely gone cold. Detectives moved on to other cases, and the public's fear of the Zodiac began to fade. But the case was far from forgotten. In the decades that followed, new generations of investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths took up the challenge of solving the Zodiac mystery. Advances in technology, like DNA analysis, brought renewed hope that the killer could finally be identified. In 2002, the San Francisco Police Department extracted a partial DNA profile from a stamp on one of the Zodiac's letters, but it wasn't enough to make a match.
We're closer than ever,
said a forensic expert in a 2020 interview.
but we still need a breakthrough.
The investigation into the Zodiac killer is a testament to the dedication of law enforcement, but it's also a reminder of the limitations of 1960s policing. The lack of forensic technology, the jurisdictional issues, and the sheer volume of tips made it nearly impossible to catch the Zodiac at the time. But even today, the case continues to captivate the public, a mystery that refuses to be solved. As we move into the final section of this episode, we'll explore the theories about the Zodiac's identity and the legacy of his crimes. The Zodiac killer case remains one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history. Despite decades of investigation, countless suspects, and advances in forensic technology, the identity of the Zodiac is still unknown. But that hasn't stopped people from trying to solve the puzzle. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged about who the Zodiac might have been. Some believe he was Arthur Lee Allen, the Vallejo schoolteacher who was the prime suspect for many years. Others point to Gary Francis Post, a man identified by a group of amateur investigators in 2021 as a possible Zodiac suspect. Others point to Gary Francis Post, a man identified by a group of amateur investigators in 2021 as a possible Zodiac suspect. Post's name came up after the 340 cipher was cracked, and some believe he fits the profile of the killer. But like all the other suspects, there's no definitive evidence linking Post to the crimes. Another theory suggests that the Zodiac may have been a team of killers, rather than a single individual. This theory is based on inconsistencies in the Zodiac's methods. He used a gun in some attacks, a knife in others, and his letters varied in tone and style.
Could there have been more than one Zodiac?
Asked true crime author John Smith in the 2022 podcast.
It's a possibility we can't rule out.
But most experts believe the Zodiac was a lone killer, a man who thrived on the attention and fear he created. The legacy of the Zodiac extends far beyond his crimes. He has become a cultural icon, a symbol of the ultimate unsolved mystery. His story has inspired countless books, movies, and TV shows, including the 2007 film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher. The case has also influenced the field of criminal profiling, showing the importance of understanding the killer's psychology in solving complex cases. And the Zodiac ciphers have become a benchmark for cryptologists, a challenge that continues to test the limits of code breaking. But for the families of the victims, the Zodiac case is not a mystery to be solved. It's a tragedy that changed their lives forever. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein were more than just names in a newspaper headline. They were sons, daughters, friends, and loved ones, taken too soon by a killer who has never faced justice.
I just want to know why,
said Darlene Ferrin's sister in a 2019 interview.
Why did he choose her? Why did he take her from us?
As we wrap up this 2-hour deep dive into the Zodiac killer, let's take a moment to reflect on the impact of this case. The Zodiac may have stopped killing, or at least stopped writing letters, but his shadow looms large over the Bay Area and the world of true crime. His crimes remind us of the fragility of safety, the power of fear, and the enduring human desire for answers. Even today, new generations of investigators are taking up the challenge, using modern technology to re-examine old evidence in the hopes of finally solving the case. So, what do you think? Who was the Zodiac killer? Was he Arthur Lee Allen, Gary Francis Post, or someone else entirely?
Do you believe the ciphers still hold the key to his identity? Or are they just another layer of his twisted game?
Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an episode of Crime Mysteries. We'll be back with another chilling tale from the world of true crime. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and keep searching for the truth.